Snow blanketed the city as Nathan Hale, a powerful CEO, stepped out of his tower and into the storm, seeking air, not answers. That's when he saw her, a little girl alone on a bench, trembling in a thin dress. "My mommy's getting dinner," she whispered. "You're the miracle, right?" He stayed. He gave her his coat. And with that, everything began to change. "You lied to me." In the warmth of a soup kitchen, Grace's voice cut through the silence like a blade. She had just learned the man who helped her daughter survive a freezing night was one of the richest CEOs in New York. "I thought I mattered, but I was just your project." And with that, she walked away. But what came next wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The snow hadn't fallen this thick in years. Manhattan looked like a ghost of itself, quiet, breathless, blanketed in white. The chaos of the city had gone mute, and in that stillness, something felt off. Nathan Hale, 34, stepped out of the gleaming revolving doors of Hale Equity Partners, his breath fogging the icy air. The cold bit at his cheeks, but it wasn't what made him pause. He had just closed $1 billion merger, but the thrill was gone. Lately, it always was. He loosened his tie, ignoring the sleek black car idling at the curb. "Tell the driver to go," he muttered into his phone. "I'll walk." His assistant sputtered a protest, but Nathan had already hung up. He didn't know where he was going. His polished shoes crunched through snow as he wandered, past the glowing neon of corner bodegas, past shuttered bakeries and forgotten alleyways, until the street lamps grew farther apart and the buildings began to sag with age. Then he saw it. Beneath a dim, flickering bus stoplight was a bench half buried in snow. On it, curled up like a whisper, was a little girl. No more than 6, maybe 7. Her dress was paper thin, her knees pulled to her chest. Wisps of breath rose from her lips. Nathan stopped, heart pounding. Logic screamed for him to keep walking. This wasn't his problem. This was New York. People passed each other like shadows all the time. But something old and buried inside him stirred. He crouched beside the bench. "Hey, do you have a home?" he asked gently. The girl blinked slowly, her lashes frozen with frost. "My mom's getting dinner," she whispered. Then she smiled barely. "You're the miracle, right?" That word, miracle, hit him harder than any boardroom negotiation ever had. He slipped off his wool coat and wrapped it around her shaking shoulders. In that instant, Nathan Hale, the man who had everything, realized he was missing the only thing that mattered, and he couldn't walk away. Elsewhere in the snow-choked city, Grace Miller's boots slipped on the icy sidewalk as she hurried through the dimly lit streets. Her coat was threadbare, her gloves mismatched, but her grip on the crumpled paper bag pressed tightly to her chest was fierce. Inside were 2 scoops of rice and half a cup of beans from the soup kitchen. Barely warm, but enough. Enough for one more night. She'd once been known as Chef Grace, the rising star behind the line at an upscale bistro in Midtown. She had plans, a logo for her own place sketched on the back of a napkin. But then the pandemic swept through like a thief in the night, first taking her job, then her home, then her certainty. Now she didn't dream. She survived. As she rounded the corner to the bus stop where she'd left Sophie, her heart clenched. The streetlight flickered. Then she saw it. A man sat beside her daughter. For a single breathless second, Grace froze. Then she ran. "Get away from her!" she screamed, voice cracking from panic and cold. The man stood slowly, hands raised, palms open. "I didn't touch her," he said. "I just stayed." His voice wasn't defensive. It was calm, steady, almost apologetic. That unnerved her more than if he'd shouted. But it was Sophie's voice that truly stopped her. The child sat up, blinking sleep from her eyes. She smiled. "He's warm, Mommy, like cocoa." Grace's breath caught. The girl hadn't smiled in days. Still trembling, Grace stepped closer, eyes locked on the stranger. He didn't look like someone who belonged on this street. Tailored slacks, a gold watch half hidden beneath his sleeve. Shoes that had never touched slush until tonight. He looked like power, like a man who should have kept walking. And yet, he hadn't. He knelt again, not to plead, but to meet her daughter's eye. "I didn't want to scare her," he said quietly. "It's freezing. She needed something warm." Without another word, he peeled off his gloves and tucked them into Sophie's tiny hands. Then he turned to Grace. "There's a motel 4 blocks from here," he said. "Let me walk you there. No agenda, no name. Just let me do this." Grace hesitated. Her entire life had taught her not to trust men in alleys. But something in his eyes, the sorrow, the restraint, cut through her fear. And so, against every survival instinct in her body, she nodded. Nathan didn't speak again. He simply took the paper bag from her shivering hand so she could carry Sophie, and together they walked. Later, when the front desk clerk asked how the room would be paid, Nathan slipped a card across the counter and walked away before Grace could thank him. Not to be a hero, not to be remembered, but because he couldn't not. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of Hale Equity's 47th floor office, casting pale light across sleek furniture and untouched coffee. Nathan sat motionless behind his desk, the world of quarterly reports and portfolio gains blurring into meaninglessness. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl's eyes, or her words. "You're the miracle, right?" No deal he had ever closed echoed that deeply. He tried to work, tried to move on. But instead of stock indexes, his mind kept replaying the image of a child shivering alone, and a woman, thin, fierce, exhausted, wrapping herself around that child like armor. There was something in Grace Miller that didn't match her circumstance, a pride without arrogance, a strength that didn't scream. So he picked up the phone. "Run a background," he told his assistant. Quietly, no flags, no alerts. Just who she is. By lunchtime, a file landed on his desk. No red flags, no criminal record, just one eviction on file. Former line cook at a family-owned cafe in Brooklyn, one that didn't survive the pandemic. No steady address, known to frequent local shelters and soup kitchens. A daughter named Sophie, age 7. Father unknown. Nathan stared at the page. This wasn't failure. This was fallout. That evening, he buttoned his coat and walked, alone, to a community kitchen in Midtown, one of several quietly funded by the Hale Foundation. It was the kind of place he'd approved budgets for, but never stepped foot inside. Until now. The smell of onions and broth hit him as he entered. Volunteers bustled about, some chatting, others focused. And there, near the large industrial pot, stood Grace. She moved with natural rhythm, ladling, greeting, wiping counters in between. Her hair was loosely tied, a borrowed apron tied tight around her waist. She offered a small smile to every person who approached, her hands never resting. She didn't look broken. She looked essential. Nathan stayed in the shadows for a while, unsure of his own presence. Then finally he stepped forward. Grace looked up and froze. "What are you doing here?" she asked, ladle in midair, voice low but sharp. "I help fund this place," Nathan said evenly. "But mostly, I came to see you." Her eyes narrowed, cautious. "Why?" He paused. "Because I haven't stopped thinking about that night. About you. About Sophie." Grace hesitated. "Are you here to offer charity?" "No," he said quietly. "I'm here because I want to understand." The line behind her moved. She turned briefly to serve a waiting man, then motioned for Nathan to step aside toward a quieter corner. "You don't get to just drop into our world because you're curious," she said, not unkindly, just honest. "This isn't an experiment." Nathan nodded. "I'm not here to fix anything. I just want to be real, even for a moment." Grace studied him, her guard still up but eyes softer now. "Then start by doing dishes," she said, tossing him a towel. He caught it, surprised. "Seriously? I'm short-handed, and since you're funding the soap, might as well put it to use." For the first time in a long time, Nathan smiled. Not the practiced one for boardrooms. A real one. Small, human. And so, in a soup kitchen tucked between forgotten buildings, a billionaire scrubbed trays beside a woman who had nothing, but gave everything. And something began, quietly, without title or contracts or promises, just 2 people, a towel, and the strange comfort of doing something that actually mattered. What began as one evening soon became many. Each night after the last bowl was served, and the soup kitchen's doors creaked closed, Grace stayed behind to pack up the leftovers. Rice in cracked containers, warm stew sealed tightly, pieces of bread wrapped in wax paper. Nathan, once awkward with a ladle, now tied his own apron and dried the last stack of trays, and then they'd leave together. Quietly, no fanfare, no headlines. They walked alley to alley, under bridges and behind subway grates, places where the forgotten lived, too afraid or ashamed to ask for help. Grace knew every corner. Nathan learned how to follow. He didn't speak much during those walks. He just watched her. She moved with the same care she used at the kitchen, kneeling beside people, placing food in their hands, never standing above them. Sometimes she'd tuck an extra napkin in, or a folded note with directions to a clinic. Always with eye contact, always with a soft, steady voice. One night they found an older man slumped beneath a stairwell. His fingers were purple, trembling. Grace didn't hesitate. She knelt beside him, removed her own coat, and wrapped it around his shoulders. The man sobbed silently. Nathan stood still, shocked. After they walked a few blocks in silence, he finally asked, "Why do you do that? Give away what little you have?" Grace glanced at him, then down at her arms now bare beneath a sweater. "Because people don't stop needing dignity," she said softly, "even if they lose everything else." Nathan didn't respond right away, but something in him shifted. He had spent his entire career calculating value of stocks, properties, assets. But Grace measured worth differently, not in profit, but in presence, not in ownership, but in kindness. And so, each night, Nathan kept showing up, not to lead, not to fix, but to carry bags, to listen, and, most surprisingly, to learn. It was just another Monday morning in Nathan's world. Contracts, projections, commercial leases stacked in digital folders. He was halfway through reviewing a portfolio of unused commercial properties when a listing stopped him cold. It was a modest cafe space in Midtown. Brick exterior, large windows, still bearing the faint imprint of its old sign. Corner and crumb. Most would scroll past it. Too small, too local, no scale. But Nathan couldn't, because all he saw was her. He saw Grace, her sleeves rolled up, apron tied snugly around her waist, a smudge of flour on her cheek, ladling soup into bowls with the same grace she used in the soup kitchen. He saw Sophie spinning between the tables, her laughter echoing against wooden floors and sunlight-washed walls. He didn't even blink. Before noon, the property was his, quietly purchased under the Hale Foundation's name. No press release, no board approval, just one signature. But he never told her, because it wasn't about praise. Every time Grace mentioned how she used to saute garlic in the morning or how she dreamt of a chalkboard menu that changed daily, Nathan stored it away like treasure. He didn't ask questions. He just listened and imagined. She'd speak casually about food, but he heard longing in her voice, not just for the kitchen, but for something rooted, something hers, a place to gather, to nourish others, not just with meals, but with safety. He began visiting the space at night when no one noticed, a folded blueprint under his arm, walking across creaky floorboards and measuring light through the front windows. He imagined where the counter would be, where Sophie's hand-drawn art would hang, and where a sign would one day read, "The Hearth," because that's what she had become to him, a warmth he didn't know he needed, a place to come back to. The project was kept completely off the books. Only his most trusted assistant knew. Even the contractors were paid anonymously. He told them nothing except, "Make it strong, make it welcoming, make it feel like it's always been hers." Meanwhile, Grace kept serving soup and healing people in ways she didn't realize, and Nathan kept walking home each night with stained cuffs and a heart that grew heavier, fuller, quieter. He didn't tell her about the cafe, not because he doubted her, but because it wasn't a gift. It was a homecoming, one he hoped she'd choose. When the walls were painted and the lights finally strung, he stood in the doorway one last time, still not ready to reveal it. Because sometimes the most powerful gifts aren't the ones wrapped with bows or announcements. They're the ones built in silence, brick by brick, out of love and patience. The kitchen was quieter than usual that afternoon. Most of the volunteers had gone home. and the only sound was the rhythmic chopping of carrots and the low simmer of soup on the back burner. Grace stood at the prep table, her hands moving on instinct. Slice, slide, stir. She didn't notice Nathan's voice at first, muffled behind the half-open office door near the back. But then she heard it. Yes, the hearth will open next month. The permit's cleared. Kitchen equipment is being installed. Just make sure the foundation's name is on everything. No, don't use mine. She doesn't know. Her knife stilled midair. The carrots blurred. The scent of onions turned bitter. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She stepped back, hand trembling, apron damp with steam. Her legs moved before she could think, carrying her to the doorway where Nathan stood, his back turned, phone still pressed to his ear. She didn't wait. You lied. He froze. Slowly he turned. His eyes met hers, startled at first, then guilty. Grace! Don't! She cut in, voice sharp and cracking. You bought that cafe, the hearth. You built it behind my back. I didn't mean to hide it. I didn't want to be the CEO around you. I wanted to be someone real. She stared at him, her hands clenched at her sides. You said I mattered, she said quietly. You listened. You asked me to trust you. And all this time, I was just some passion project for your foundation? No, he said instantly, stepping closer. You're not a project. I built that place because I saw you, because I believed in you. But the damage was done. Grace took a step back. Her voice lowered, but every word cut. I've spent my whole life being invisible to men like you, until they want to feel like heroes. I don't need saving, Nathan. I need dignity. He looked stricken. Please, he said, softer now. It wasn't charity. It was love, she finished bitterly. Then you should have told me. You should have treated me like an equal, not a surprise. She reached behind her, unknotted her apron, and laid it gently on the counter. Thank you for the coat, and the meals, and the hope. But this, her voice broke, this hurts more than sleeping on concrete ever did. And then she turned, walked past the prep tables, past the door. Nathan didn't stop her. He stood there, phone still in hand, heart thudding like a war drum in his chest as the door swung shut behind her, leaving only silence, steam, and the heavy scent of betrayal. Nathan's world fell silent again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The noise of Wall Street meetings, ringing phones, and clinking glasses at exclusive dinners used to make him feel powerful. Now it all felt like static, like background noise in a life that had lost its center. Each morning before entering his glass tower, Nathan detoured. He walked down the same cracked sidewalk, past the deli with the flickering neon sign, past the darkened bakery, until he reached the bus stop. The bench still stood there, silent, cold, empty. No little girl in a coat too big. No mother with tired eyes and quiet strength. He would pause, hands in his pockets, scanning for even a trace of them. A crayon left behind. A glove. A sign. But there was nothing. At night, he packed the leftover food from the soup kitchen himself. He loaded it into paper bags, one by one, and set out on the same routes they once walked together. Past subway entrances, behind the old church, under bridges, places she had memorized by heart. But the walks were different now. Colder, slower, lonelier. The people he met along the way still accepted the food, still nodded their thanks. But none of them looked him in the eye the way Grace did. None of them asked questions. None of them said, "You don't have to fix me, just see me." He missed her voice, her fire, the way Sophie had laughed when he'd slipped on snow and called himself a businessman on ice. And he missed the version of himself that only existed when she was around. One night, snow falling thick around him, Nathan stood under the same old street lamp where he had first met Sophie. The light above him buzzed and flickered, casting long shadows across the slush. He closed his eyes, and for the first time he whispered it aloud, not to her, not to anyone, just to the night. She didn't need saving. I did. The snow answered in silence, landing gently on his coat, and Nathan Hale, the man who once had everything, realized he was finally learning what it meant to lose and why it mattered. The soup kitchen smelled of ginger and garlic that evening, a warm contrast to the bitter wind outside. Nathan stood just beyond the threshold, unsure whether to take another step. The clatter of pots, the low hum of volunteers cleaning up, and the familiar warmth of the space drew him in like gravity. But it wasn't the room he was looking for. It was her. Grace. She stood at the far end of the prep station, tying a fresh apron around her waist, her face calm but unreadable. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't acknowledge him when he stepped closer, but she saw him. Nathan waited, unsure of what to say. Then, without speaking, Grace turned, ladled a bowl of steaming soup, and walked it over to the counter in front of him. She placed it down gently. "Extra ginger," she said flatly, wiping her hands on her apron. He looked at the bowl, then at her. The scent hit him first. Sharp, warm, familiar, like comfort wrapped in spice. "I came," he said slowly, "because I needed you." Grace didn't flinch, but she didn't move away either. Her eyes searched his, not for apology, but for truth. "Not the food, not the project," he continued. "You." She stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. "You said you didn't want to be the CEO," she said, "but you still acted like one." He nodded. "I know. I thought I was protecting something. Protecting you. But the truth is, I was hiding." He looked down at the bowl. "Nothing tastes right anymore," he said quietly, "unless it's made by you." That made her pause. A long silence settled between them, filled only by the distant scraping of chairs and the soft boiling of broth on the stove behind her. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "Then don't leave again." Nathan looked up. Her eyes weren't angry anymore, just tired, guarded. But somewhere beneath that, there was something else, something fragile and alive. "I won't," he said. "Not because I want to fix things, but because I finally know what it means to stay." Grace didn't smile, not yet, but she slid the bowl an inch closer, then turned back to the kitchen. And Nathan, man of power, numbers, and pride, sat down, lifted the spoon, and tasted something real. Not just soup, but hope. 1 year later, the snow returned, but this time it felt softer, kinder, as if it remembered. Nestled between rows of weathered brick buildings stood the Hearth Village, no longer just a dream, but a thriving sanctuary built on second chances. What was once a vacant cafe and forgotten lot had become a home, complete with shared gardens, classrooms, and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and rosemary, even in winter. Grace now wore her apron like a badge of honor, her name etched above the title, head chef and program director. Her once weary eyes now sparkled with quiet pride as she stirred pots, trained new staff, and taught single mothers how to prepare meals with purpose and joy. Sophie, now 6, zipped through the crowd at the grand opening, her yellow sash boldly declaring her role as ambassador of smiles. She greeted guests with candy canes and giggles, tugging them toward the cookie table she had decorated herself. Nathan stood near the stage, humbled in a wool coat and open collar, holding his speech notes loosely in one hand. But before he could begin, a small whirlwind of energy burst onto the platform. Sophie, with a toy microphone in hand and cheeks red from excitement, she turned to the crowd. "This is my dad," she declared proudly. "He's not a miracle. He's just mine." Laughter rippled through the audience. Grace, standing near the kitchen entrance, pressed a hand to her heart, tears glistening. Nathan knelt beside Sophie and whispered, "You sure know how to make an entrance." "Well," she grinned, "you took long enough." That night, the three of them returned to the cottage nestled beside the hearth's garden. It was small, wooden floors, bookshelves, and the warmth of meals shared without fear. Home. In the kitchen, Grace sliced apple cake while Sophie knelt on the windowsill, eyes to the sky. Outside, lanterns floated into the snowy night, each carrying handwritten wishes from the community below. "We used to wish for a miracle," Grace said quietly. Nathan wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. "You were the miracle I never dared to ask for," he whispered. And under the drifting snow and golden light, they stood together. Not saved, not rescued, but found. At last. In today's world, we often celebrate loud success, wealth, titles, social media influence. But stories like Nathan and Grace's remind us of something far quieter and far more lasting, the power of presence. Nathan didn't change lives with a checkbook. He changed because he stayed. Grace didn't need rescuing. She needed someone who would listen, not label her. And little Sophie? She didn't need magic. She just needed someone who didn't walk away. In a culture that moves fast and rewards independence, we sometimes forget how much courage it takes to be soft, to sit beside someone in silence, to give dignity without asking for praise. So here's a question for you. Have you ever been someone's miracle just by showing up? Or has someone done that for you? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And maybe this story made you think about kindness differently. Maybe it reminded you that not all heroes wear capes. Sometimes they wear borrowed aprons or hand someone their coat without a word. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes in good people. Drop a comment. We read everyone. Tap like to support more stories like this. And subscribe to Warm Soul Stories, because there's always another soul to stir, another lesson to carry home. Thank you for spending time with us. And remember, home isn't a place. It's how we make people feel.